What a delight it is to be on this staff. I'm so thankful for this season in my life. I tell people that all the time. In fact, the thing that I've said over and over and over and over again, if someone had asked me to script the last 4 plus years of my life, I couldn't have scripted this prior to coming here. I'm just so grateful for the chance to minister with Pastor Blake and the team and to be here at Wesley. And I'm so thankful that we are preaching through the book of Ephesians. It is such an important book in the Bible. And here's one of the thoughts that I had. Welcome to my world. Here's a thought that I had preparing for this message. For the last couple of weeks, I've been churning over this message because I don't think I've gotten to the bottom of it. In fact, I don't even think I'm near the bottom of it. And it's a little frustrating to me because I think there's so much more here that I wish I could grab a hold of. And I hope it whets your appetite. But here's one of my thoughts in preparation, that I don't think the Apostle Paul would have had that Marvin Hamlish song that Streisand sang on his playlist. You know what I'm talking about? This is going way back. Streisand singing Memories. Listen to one of the verses in that song by Marvin Hamlish. Memories may be beautiful, and yet what's too painful to remember, we simply choose to forget. Now that may be beautiful in a song sung by Streisand, but it is not a part of the Apostle Paul's direction for the church in Ephesus. And it is not a part of his direction through the Holy Spirit for the church today. Because deep within Paul's heart, inspired by the Holy Spirit, is the challenge for the church in Ephesus and for today to remember. And not just memories that are good, smiles we gave to one another. But Paul is challenging the church in Ephesus to remember the painful place, the dark place, the hopeless place that they were, the way they were. That's what's in Paul's heart, inspired by the Holy Spirit, to remember the way that they were. And Paul understands, I think, at this point, how crucial this church in Ephesus is. This young church, probably many house churches that meet separately, but this letter's given to the church at Ephesus, these number of young, vulnerable gatherings, communities, families of believers in Jesus Christ in the city of Ephesus. Paul understands the strategic nature of Ephesus, and he understands the darkness that consumes that city. Listen to some of the things that I read. The stakes are high for the young church. In the first century, the city of Ephesus had an environment very similar to our own modern-day America. It was the crossroads of civilization, politically known as the supreme metropolis of Asia. The Roman governor of the region lived in Ephesus. It was the religious center for worship of the fertility goddess, known by the Greeks as Artemis and by the Romans as Diana. It was the center of Greek and Roman pagan demonic worship. The temple to Artemis and Diana on the outskirts of the city of Ephesus was known as one of the 7 wonders of the world. And what took place in the temple to Diana was a cult of ritual prostitution whereby the devotee, the average citizen in Ephesus, could join with one of the temple prophetesses, one of the temple prostitutes, and thereby join in spirit with the goddess Diana or Artemis to the Greeks. Connecting in that way in the temple, one of the 7 wonders of the world, with demonic power and darkness. That is Ephesus. And Paul is wanting this new vulnerable church to develop a root system that remembers the way they were. We saw it in Pastor Blake's message last week, which I thought was so powerful and tremendous, from Ephesians chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. And in those first 3 verses of chapter 2, Paul's agenda, his heart, inspired by the Holy Spirit, is for the church in Ephesus to remember the way they were. In fact, my outline for that passage, the first 3 verses of Ephesians 2, goes like this: dead, disobedient, depraved, and doomed. That's the way they were. Listen, as you were dead in your transgressions, verse 1, the way you used to live when you followed the ways of the world, the ruler of the kingdom of air, the spirit who is now at work in those who are disobedient, dead, disobedient. All of us also lived among them at one time, gratifying the cravings of our flesh, following its desires and thoughts, depraved. Like the rest, verse 3, we were by nature objects of wrath, doomed. That's how Ephesians 2 starts. Now, blessed be the name of the Lord. It doesn't end with verse 3, because verse 4 starts with the word but. What follows that one little 3-letter word is some of the most majestic, powerful, authoritative words that you could ever hear, because it describes the grace of God that saves us from dead, disobedient, depraved, and doomed. You were saved by grace through faith. And now you can be seated with him. But Paul does not want the young church in Ephesus to fail to remember the depths from which they came, the way they were. And we'll pick that up again in verse 11 and 12 and following in the second half of chapter 2. Paul wants the church, the vulnerable church, in the midst of deep demonic darkness, he wants them to remember. And in the first 2 verses of our passage, Ephesians 2, verses 11 and 12, Paul describes the alienation in which they lived prior to Christ, before the but God. Listen to verses 11 and 12. Alienation. Therefore, remember, that's what's in Paul's heart. Remember this, that formerly you who are Gentiles by birth and called uncircumcised by those who call themselves the circumcision, the Jewish race, which is done in the body by human hands, remember that at that time you were separate from Christ, excluded from citizenship in Israel, and foreigners to the covenants of promise, without hope and without God in the world. Man, there's a lot there. And Paul's saying to the Gentile church in Ephesus, don't forget this. You've got to hold on to this. That prior to your experience, your encounter with Christ, you weren't part of the circumcision, the Jewish religion, the worship of Yahweh, the one true God. Circumcision, the sign given to the nation of Israel that they were chosen to be God's people, and Yahweh was their God. The Gentiles were not a part of that. They weren't citizens of that nation, a part of that kingdom. They were separate from Christ, excluded from Israel, and foreigners to God's covenant of love, protection, power. Foreigners, aliens to the covenants. And then he just sums it all up by saying, without hope and without God. Utter darkness